I'm not taking a break from my Ukraine updates, but I've also made this video by request, so please like, subscribe, and continue to write in the comment section for your favorite topics. This week, we'll be focusing on the weapon systems supplied by the West to Ukraine, specifically what they do, how they fit the West's goals, how those goals overlap and do not overlap with those of Ukraine. And since people usually like big things that go boom, we'll start with the tank. Western tanks sent to Ukraine come in three models: the American Abrams, the German Leopard, and the British Challenger. The Abrams at the bottom, Leopard in the middle, Challenger on top. There's not really that many differences between these three models. All have a 4-man crew, a 120mm main gun, and composite armor. The 120mm main gun can penetrate any Russian tank. The composite armor can stop most tank and anti-tank rounds fired by Russia. All possess high reverse speeds, an area that the T-series tanks currently used by Ukraine are notoriously deficient in. This allows the tank to quickly move back from its firing position and enhances their survivability. Western tanks have sophisticated computer support, fire control, and night vision, which lets them fight in all environments, be more accurate, and fire first when compared to Ukraine's current models. Since tank combat usually depends on who scores the first hit, these are important upgrades. Now, nothing is certain in war, but we do know this: Western tanks will utterly smash the Russians one for one tactically. We know this because it's happened in the Balkans, it's happened in Lebanon, and it's happened twice in Iraq. When Russian T-series tanks have gone up against Western tanks, the result has been that the Western tanks have won, and won decisively. Western tanks have shrugged off any Russian weapon, from T-series tanks to mines to RPGs, and most importantly, they have kept their crews safe. Tanks are important because, despite their obituary being written again and again, and we saw that at the start of this war, tanks are still the kings of the battlefield. Tanks smash barbed wire, roll over trenches, destroy machine guns, hit any armored vehicle they see, and provide protection for infantry with their cannons and machine guns. They knock out enemy machine gun nests and allow the infantry to move forward. No modern advance can be made without them. Yet tanks are fragile. They're easily vulnerable at the sides and the rear. They are easily seen and attacked from the air. Many of Russia's 2022 tank losses were due to the tanks moving forwards by themselves. We have known since before World War II that the infantry must move with tanks to protect them from enemy anti-tank teams. This brings us to the next series of vehicles, the Infantry Fighting Vehicle, or IFV. The point of the IFV is exactly what its name says. It's to carry infantry forward and protecting them with armor. When the battlefield is reached, the infantry dismounts, the IFV's autocannon then covers them in battle. The IFV usually comes with anti-tank missiles that enable it to take out enemy tanks, so its infantry squad can focus on guarding your own tanks. The infantry then advance under the cover of IFV and tank fire to suppress enemy snipers, machine guns, and anti-tank teams to close with the enemy and destroy his force. Ukraine already has many Soviet-era BMP-2 model IFVs, but Western Bradleys, Martyrs, and CV-90s provide better protection, better night anti-tank platforms, and far better night fighting capabilities. You should have noticed that some of those attributes, in fact all of them, overlap with the Western tanks that we discussed in the previous slide. There are about 180 IFVs that have been promised to Ukraine. Once your force has broken through the enemy line, you must exploit. The enemy can be allowed no chance to regroup. You must get in the rear and cause havoc and panic, quickly seizing your objectives. This is where the Striker vehicle comes into its own. It's wheeled, so it's faster, it can only drive on roads, and it does have lighter armor, but these are all acceptable. Its speed is important in its role, all-terrain mobility and armor protection less so. Its job is to dash through the hole because the enemy's rear will have far less lethal weapons. Then it and its infantry squad drive straight through their objectives, causing general havoc, shooting up rear areas, bushwhacking supply dumps, and etc. en route. There are about 90 Striker infantry APCs, 90 Striker vehicles, and you can see them on the image on this right, that have been promised by the US to exploit any breakthrough made by the Ukrainians. But a breakthrough also requires other and more specialized vehicles. The Russians have multiple trench lines with minefields between them, obstacles in front of them. We'll discuss those in the coming slides. So, the military has invented specialized vehicles to break through, and they are very simple. Do you need a bridge? There is an armored bridge vehicle. Do you need a minefield? There's an armored mine clearing vehicle. Are there obstacles? You guessed it, there's an armored engineering vehicle. So there's an armored bridge layer, a mine clearing vehicle. It launches a long explosive charge on a rope into a minefield, which then detonates, blowing up the mines. And finally, an armored engineer vehicle to fill in obstacles like anti-tank ditches. These are not sexy vehicles. They don't make headlines, but they are absolutely critical, probably even more important than the tanks, because Ukraine can attack without new tanks if it has to, but nobody would ever attack into a minefield without mine-clearing equipment. Now, would they, Russia? All these weapons, the tanks, the IFVs, the specialized vehicles, they are intended to match the West's goal of teaching Ukraine how to fight like the West. Ukraine cannot advance like Russia has done around Bakhmut, throwing tens of thousands of men and hundreds of thousands of shells to advance 10 miles, because it simply hasn't got the shells or the men to do that. But if Ukraine can substitute quick maneuver for Russia-style sheer slugging power, it won't need all those shells. It won't need all those men. This is how the West fights. Many people have wondered why the West hasn't got enough shells to send Ukraine. In part, it's because the West doesn't fight like Ukraine's been forced to do. The West fights through maneuver. One other point that should be mentioned here is that these weapons are all ground vehicles. According to the tortured logic that is prevailing in Washington, these are less escalatory since other weapons. And since our administration is convinced that Russia's delicate nerves need to be constantly soothed, providing these vehicles fits the Western agenda on the front of not escalating. Meanwhile, these vehicles do overlap with Ukraine's interests. Ukraine wants to seize its own territory. These weapons will help them do that. They do not overlap with Ukraine's interests of striking the Russians deep in the rear and carrying the war into Russia. So there is a notable difference there that should be addressed. To illustrate this point a little better, this is a typical Russian defense scheme. There's a minefield, there's followed by an anti-tank ditch, followed by Dragon's Teeth defensive emplacements, followed by yet another minefield, followed by a trench line, followed by tanks, followed by artillery further back into the rear. How is Ukraine going to attack this? Well, first, Ukraine's artillery, which we'll discuss in a moment, will knock out the Russian artillery. Then, Ukraine's Ukraine's armored engineer vehicles will blow holes through the Russian anti-tank ditch, or if the anti-tank ditch is deep enough, their armored bridges will do it. Next, Ukraine's mine-clearing vehicles will blow holes through the Russian minefields here. Following that, Ukraine's tanks will spearhead the advance, followed by infantry fighting vehicles on their flanks to provide protection from the Russian infantry stationed here and break the Russian defense line here. Then, the entire process will be repeated at this defense line. I just mentioned artillery and how it would provide the key role in the initial attack by knocking out the Russian weapons. And it's now time to talk about artillery. This includes everyone's favorite weapon, and that's right, it's HIMARS, a clock. Ukraine is a post-USSR country. That means it inherited Soviet doctrine. Soviet doctrine called for lots and lots and lots of big guns and lots and lots and lots of ammunition. You've seen this because the Russians also adopted it, and you've seen the Russians use it to good effect around Severodonetsk and Lysychansk to inflict heavy Ukrainian casualties. As we discussed, the West doesn't fight like this. Western artillery is few in number, and therefore we haven't been able to send many artillery weapons to Ukraine. But Western artillery makes up for it by being longer ranged and more accurate. Western artillery comes in two types, guns and rockets. Guns come in two types as well. They are exactly as they're shown, big friggin' guns. Guns are either towed, like the M777 howitzer, or they are self-propelled, like the Caesar howitzer. As you can see, the Caesar is mounted on a truck that can drive around, that's why it's called self-propelled. Towed guns are cheaper, but they take longer to set up. They usually have a slower rate of fire. SPGs are faster to set up, they fire faster, they are more expensive. But both models outrange most Russian artillery. Caesar ranges out to 40 kilometers, or 24 miles, or 55 kilometers with rocket-assisted rounds. The M777 has a maximum range of 40 kilometers with Excalibur rounds. The main Russian gun has a maximum range of 36 kilometers. I am speaking in kilometers because that is what most militaries use. If you would like to convert to freedom units, please remember that 1 kilometer is 0.6 miles. Now, rockets are provided in the form of HIMARS. Rockets are longer ranged, carry more explosive, and, HIMARS only here, they are more accurate. But rockets are even more expensive and they take a long time to reload. Now, HIMARS has a range of 50 miles, it's GPS guided, and it carries a 200-pound warhead. This means that you set up the launcher, you plug in the GPS coordinates of your target, you press your big red button, and you have now just deleted whatever you aimed at. Congratulations. HIMARS' targets are Russian supply dumps, headquarters, and bridges. The effectiveness of HIMARS is shown from these next two images. That's what the effect of the Antonovsky Bridge after HIMARS was used against it. As you can see, it punched gigantic holes straight through the bridge deck. The next image down here is an image of Russian artillery concentrations before and after Ukraine achieved HIMARS. You can see before, where each red dot represents a fire started by Russian artillery, and then you can see on the right-hand side what happened after. So clearly, HIMARS has had a decisive effect. The next weapon in this category, this weapon has just arrived, it's not an artillery weapon at all, it's a long-range guided weapon, however, and so it'll fit better here with HIMARS. It's Storm Shadow. Storm Shadow is not going to get an acronym for what should be fairly obvious reasons. That said, it's a stealthy guided air-launched missile with a range of over 200 miles and a 1,000-pound two-stage armor-piercing warhead. If HIMARS can cause this devastation, with 200 pounds of high explosives, I would like you to imagine what a warhead 5 times larger can do. Russians' response to HIMARS was the highly sophisticated strategy of simply moving their supply depots out of range and digging in their headquarters. Storm Shadow will of course negate both of those countermeasures with its larger warhead and longer range. This will place Russia back under threat. We've already seen Ukraine use this weapon to hit repair shops, headquarters, and airfields. Storm Shadow is also used with the MALD-160. MALD-160 is a decoy missile. It carries no warhead. What it does carry is a gigantic electronic signature suite that can be programmed so it mimics the electronic signature of any Western weapon. Therefore, Russians must shoot at every Storm Shadow signature that they see, even though they will be wasting some of their missiles on simple decoys. Last on the list for today is Western anti-air systems, because after all, your weapons may be very good if they hit the enemy, but ideally you would like to prevent your enemy's weapons from hitting you. Patriot system is the most prominent of the Western anti-air systems because it was just delivered and because it is the most capable system. Patriot is not just a missile, it's not just a launcher, it's a full system. It's a command post, a mobile generator, a set of radars, and up to 4 launchers. Each launcher carries up to 16 missiles. Ukraine has apparently gotten the PAC-2 missile variant, which is not the most modern one. There's a range of 160 kilometers or about 100 miles that we know about. The Patriot battery is a large system with a large footprint, and it's usually deployed to cover a static target. That's one that doesn't move. Both of Ukraine's batteries appear to be deployed around Kyiv, which is as expected. Kyiv is the highest value target, therefore it should get the best protection. These batteries perform a number of services. First, they free up the systems that previously covered Kyiv for redeployment. Second, they have astonishing success rates against cruise missiles, so Russia has to fire more missiles to achieve the same effect. Third, they can shoot down Killjoy and Iskander ballistic missiles and Kh-22 anti-ship missiles. Before Patriot arrived, Ukraine could not hit any of those weapons. Now they can. Civilian morale has presumably improved because they don't have to sit there and take it, they can shoot back. And lastly, Patriot systems in and of themselves are high-value targets. They attract a lot of fire, which means that Russia can no longer target Kyiv's power stations, train stations, bridges, and other important infrastructure, and rather they are shooting at the Patriots. Now, Ukraine's SAM capabilities are actually very good. However, the problem is that they simply don't have a lot of missiles. They started the war with a good stockpile, but war chews up munitions pretty fast. And while we have bought up nearly every missile on the international market that's available and sent it to Ukraine, the primary producer of missiles for Ukraine's own SAM systems is Russia. and unfortunately, Russia has not seen fit to give Ukraine any weapons. So, there have been other Western systems donated to Ukraine to help fill the gaps here. For example, the NASAM system covers the medium range from about 50 kilometers in. IRIS-T covers the short range from about 15 kilometers in, and the Gepard anti-aircraft gun covers the point-blank defense, the last ditch. It is also used to shoot down drones, since it is much cheaper to shoot 35mm shells at a drone than to shoot a missile at it. I am fully aware that I did not cover F-16s in this video. That is because I went over what capabilities they will provide to Ukraine in my previous video. The link to that is in the description. As always, all sources are linked in the description. I hope this video was informative, it answered your questions, and I'll see you all again next week.